In the dawn's like boots on the ground, the leaves crunch beneath as we head down. There's something about the woods, and for the peace, the quiet, we heed the call. Won't you join me on this trail, dear, where the deer stand tall and the air so clear?
You're listening to my favorite podcast, the
Big Buck Registry.
Big Buck Registries.
Big Buck Registry is
Big Buck Registry.
The Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunt Podcast.
Before we jump into today's show, I've got a few things I want to share with you. Big Buck Registry has built a set of free tools designed to help you time your hunts better. DeerMove gives you a daily deer movement forecast combining weather, pressure, temperature changes, moon phase if you toggle it in, your choice, daylight hours, and rut timing into a simple movement score. DeerMoon strips it down even further. A fast, moon phase only outlook for hunters who track lunar patterns. And when it comes to conditions, Deer Hunt Weather delivers a hunting-focused forecast with current conditions, weather alerts, hourly detail, and a 10-day outlook. No subscriptions, no clutter, just practical tools built by hunters for hunters. Free, simple, accurate, and all you need is a zip code. Check them all out at bigbuckregistry.com and be in the woods when the deer are on their feet. For Deer Hunter Weather, it's bigbuckregistry.com/deerhuntweather. For the deer movement prediction by weather factors, it's bigbuckregistry.com/deermove. And for the weather for the day, hour, and week visit, bigbuckregistry.com/weather. If you've got a story from this season, a hunt that meant something, a lesson learned, or just a moment you'll never forget, call 724-613-2825 and leave a voicemail. Or head over to bigbuckregistry.com/speakpipe and record it right from your phone. We share listener stories on upcoming episodes, and we'd love to include yours. And finally, a quick word about how this show keeps going. The Big Buck Registry runs on the value for value model. Listeners like you who find value in what we do and choose to return a little value back. If you'd like to support the show, visit bigbuckregistry.com/value. Every contribution helps us stay independent and keep these conversations alive. Today is a special Evergreen Revival episode. Back on December 28th, 2013, we released episode 27, an interview with Jeff Makemson, a certified wildlife biologist with the Alabama Division of Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries. That episode asked a simple question that most deer hunters never really stop to consider. Where does the money come from to support wildlife conservation, habitat management, and the fish and game agencies that make modern deer hunting possible? In that conversation, Jeff walked us through the funding system behind wildlife restoration. He told stories from the field. He explained how conservation projects get paid for, and he helped connect the dots between hunters, funding, and the recovery of deer populations across America. That interview has aged well, because the core message is still true. Modern deer hunting exists because wildlife conservation is funded, and a major part of that funding comes from hunters and shooters themselves. But since that episode was recorded more than a decade ago, I wanted to bring it back the right way, with fresh context, clearer explanations, and a modern deep dive into the Pittman-Robertson Act. Before we jump into that, I want to quickly clean up a couple of things from the original episode. Nothing dramatic, just places where conversational wording from 2013 deserves a clearer, more accurate explanation today. In the original conversation, we implied that the Pittman-Robertson tax has never changed. The truth is, the core funding model created in 1937 has remained remarkably consistent, but the program has been amended and refined over the decades to improve how funds are collected and used. And the important takeaway remains the same. The excise tax conservation model established in 1937 is still the backbone of wildlife funding today. We also talked about Pittman-Robertson funds not being used for law enforcement. The clearer way to say this is that Pittman-Robertson dollars are intended for wildlife restoration, habitat, research, management, hunter education, and shooting ranges, while routine law enforcement and agency operations are typically funded through license revenue and state budgets. The principle remains the same. PR funds are dedicated to restoration and management of the wildlife resource. And finally, in the original episode, we used some dramatic population comparisons to emphasize how much wildlife recovery has occurred. The exact numbers can vary by state and era, but the larger truth is undisputed. Deer and many other game species were once at historic lows, and long-term management funded through conservation programs helped rebuild them to sustainable, huntable populations. None of this changes the message of that 2013 interview. It simply sharpens it for today. Now, a quick word about what's changed since 2013.
Firearm and ammunition sales rise and fall with economic and political cycles, and that affects annual Pittman-Robertson funding levels. Wildlife managers today also face new challenges: habitat fragmentation, land access pressures, emerging diseases, and changing participation trends in hunting. At the same time, conversations have grown about how to ensure long-term conservation funding, not only for game species, but for all wildlife.
But through all of that, the Pittman-Robertson Act remains one of the most successful conservation funding systems in the world, and one of the most important reasons deer hunting still thrives today.
So here's how this episode is going to unfold. First, I'm going to walk you through a clear, modern deep dive into the Pittman-Robertson Act, what it is, why it was created, how it works, and why it matters to deer hunters.
Then we'll roll the original episode 27 interview with Jeff Makemson from December 2013. If you've ever wondered how deer populations were rebuilt, how habitat is funded, and how hunters fit into the conservation picture, you're in exactly the right place.
Let's get into it. The Pittman-Robertson Act, the single most important piece of legislation most deer hunters have never heard of, even though it quietly built the modern hunting world we live in today. Let's start with the simplest version possible. The Pittman-Robertson Act is the reason there is consistent, dedicated money flowing into wildlife conservation in the United States. It's the reason deer populations were rebuilt. It's the reason habitat is managed. It's the reason wildlife agencies employ professional biologists. It's the reason public hunting lands exist in so many places. And it's the reason hunter education programs and public shooting ranges are even possible in many states. And here's the key.
This system doesn't run primarily on general taxpayer money. It runs, in large part, on money generated by hunters and shooters themselves. Every time someone buys certain firearms, ammunition, or archery equipment, a small federal excise tax is collected. That money is locked into a dedicated wildlife restoration fund. Then it gets distributed to state wildlife agencies for specific conservation purposes. In other words, hunters and shooters pay in. Wildlife restoration gets funded.
Deer populations get rebuilt.
Habitat gets managed, and hunting opportunities exist. That's the loop, and it's been running since 1937. Now, to understand why this had to exist in the first place, we've got to go back to a time that's almost impossible for modern hunters to picture. In the early 1900s, wildlife across North America was in serious trouble. Deer were overhunted.
Turkeys were disappearing. Elk were rare.
Waterfowl were hammered. There were few seasons, few bag limits, and almost no professional wildlife management. On top of that, market hunting was common. Animals weren't just hunted for personal food, but harvested in bulk for sale. Habitat loss was accelerating as forests were cleared and land was developed. And state wildlife agencies, where they existed, had almost no stable funding, very few trained biologists, and limited enforcement ability. By the 1930s, many states had almost no huntable deer populations at all. In some regions, seeing a deer track was rare. In others, deer were completely gone. People in government, in conservation circles, and in the hunting community realized something critical. If we didn't fix this, there might not be wildlife left for future generations to hunt. And that's where the Pittman-Robertson Act was born. In 1937, Congress passed the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act, what we now call the Pittman-Robertson Act, named after Senator Key Pittman of Nevada and Representative Absalom Willis Robertson of Virginia. The core idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Take an existing federal excise tax on firearms and ammunition, and instead of letting it disappear into the general treasury, earmark it specifically for wildlife restoration. Not for roads, not for unrelated programs, but for wildlife, for habitat, for research,
for land acquisition,
for management,
for restoration. And because conservation projects cost real money, the act required states to put up a portion of matching funds, typically about 25%, with Pittman Robertson funds covering about 75%. This created a partnership between federal funding and state wildlife agencies, ensuring both sides had skin in the game.
This was the birth of modern, professional wildlife management in America. And from that moment forward, the recovery of game species, including the whitetail deer, truly began. Now let's talk about how this works in real terms today. When firearms, ammunition, and later archery equipment are manufactured and sold, a federal excise tax is collected at the manufacturer level. That tax is built into the price of the product over time. Hunters don't see a line item at checkout, but it's there. That revenue goes into the Wildlife Restoration Trust Fund. Then each year those funds are allocated to states using a formula based primarily on two factors: the geographic size of the state and the number of licensed hunters in that state. States then submit conservation project proposals, habitat work, research programs, land acquisition, public hunting access improvements, hunter education programs, shooting ranges, and those projects are funded using Pittman-Robertson dollars combined with state matching funds, often from license revenue. This means states that manage wildlife well, maintain hunter participation, and protect their license revenue get stronger conservation budgets. It creates accountability. It creates stability. And it allows long-term planning, and something wildlife management absolutely requires.
Now let's bring this back to deer hunters specifically, because for deer hunters, Pittman-Robertson is nothing short of a miracle. Think about where whitetails were a century ago. In many states, they were nearly gone. Entire regions had no deer. Hunting seasons were closed for decades in some places. The idea of annual deer seasons, multiple tag options, extended archery seasons, and healthy herds was unimaginable. Through habitat restoration, regulated harvest, restocking programs, scientific research, and decades of management, all made possible through sustained funding, deer populations rebounded across the country.
State wildlife agencies trapped deer from remnant populations and released them into suitable habitat. They improved forests, they planted food resources, they studied herd dynamics, they adjusted seasons and bag limits. They monitored health and disease, they acquired land, they opened public hunting areas. All of that costs money.
And Pittman-Robertson provided the reliable funding to make it happen. That's why today we live in a time where many states manage not scarcity, but abundance, where deer seasons are established every year, where public hunting land exists, where research monitors herd health, where hunter education brings new people into the tradition.
It's not accidental. It's not luck. It's a system. Now, here's an important truth. Pittman-Robertson funds don't just help deer. They benefit entire ecosystems. When habitat is restored for deer, it benefits songbirds, small mammals, pollinators, and countless other species. When wetlands are restored for waterfowl, water quality improves. When forests are managed for game, biodiversity increases. This is why the model is often described as user pays, everyone benefits. Hunters and shooters pay into the system through their purchases. Wildlife and society as a whole benefits from healthy ecosystems, public lands, and outdoor recreation opportunities. But for deer hunters, the personal benefit is obvious. Healthy herds and accessible land, managed habitat, scientific oversight, long-term stability. And there's another piece that matters just as much as habitat and animals: people. Pittman-Robertson funds help pay for wildlife biologists, habitat technicians, researchers, hunter education instructors, range development, conservation programs.
These are the professionals who ensure deer hunting is sustainable, ethical, and productive, not a free-for-all that collapses the resource again.
Now, over the decades, the Pittman-Robertson program has been refined and updated. Additional equipment categories were added. Specific funding streams for hunter education and shooting ranges were created. Oversight and accountability systems were strengthened.
But the core model remains the same as it was in 1937. Dedicated excise taxes to locked conservation fund to state wildlife restoration projects.
And that consistency is exactly why this program has outlasted political cycles, economic downturns, and shifting cultural trends. Now let's talk about the cultural reality. For generations, hunters have been the primary funding engine behind wildlife conservation in the United States. That's not a slogan. It's not marketing, it's financial reality. Hunters buy licenses, hunters buy gear, and hunters buy ammunition, hunters buy firearms. And through those purchases, billions of dollars have flowed into wildlife restoration over the past 8 decades. That's why hunters can legitimately say, we didn't just save deer hunting, we paid for it, we built it, and we sustain it. That's also why participation matters so much. When hunter numbers decline, license revenue drops. When gear sales drop, excise tax revenue drops. When funding drops, habitat projects shrink. Research slows. Access becomes harder to maintain. Recruitment becomes harder. This is why mentoring new hunters matters. Why sharing the tradition matters. Why keeping deer hunting relevant matters. It's because participation fuels the funding model. And the funding model fuels the resource. So it's a closed loop. And finally, let's bring this to the present. Today, wildlife managers face new challenges: habitat fragmentation, urban expansion, disease threats, changing land ownership patterns, shifting public attitudes, participation trends. All of these require research, management, planning, and funding. Pittman-Robertson remains one of the strongest conservation funding systems in the world. It is studied internationally. It is emulated in other conservation models. It is considered one of the greatest conservation success stories in American history.
And yet most hunters have no idea it exists.
That's why this episode matters.
Because when you understand this system, you understand that deer hunting isn't just a pastime. It's part of a national conservation strategy that rebuilt wildlife from collapse to abundance.
So the next time you buy ammunition or pick up a new rifle or buy archery gear, just remember,
you're not just preparing for a season.
You're participating in the engine that keeps wildlife on the landscape. And that is a legacy every deer hunter should be proud of. All right, now that we've laid the foundation, it's time to go back to where this conversation began. Let's roll the original 2013 interview with Jeff Makemson from Big Buck Registry, episode 27, released December 28th, 2013.
So we have a pretty cool show today. This is a little more serious than we usually do this, but I thought it was a very interesting topic, and this is more me than you. I know you consider me more the serious side of this whole thing.
But it's going to be very informal for our listeners. And that's kind of where it's something that we need to get out there.
Absolutely. And I got an email from Edison Waite, our good friend from Buckmasters, the master scorer there. And the email was entitled Wildlife and the Outdoors. And it was this article written about how gun and ammunition sales affect state game and fish agencies. And it was written by a guy by the name of Jeff Makemson, who is a certified wildlife biologist from the Alabama Division of Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries. And lo and behold, there was a phone number attached at the bottom of the website, and I gave him a call. And I got a hold of Jeff Makemson to speak to us about the details of his article that he wrote. And it's really all about where the money comes from to support fish and game agencies and conservation efforts, and how the money actually gets there from the federal level.
And that's something that we want everybody listen to this podcast and get familiar with where the funding comes from.
Right. And it's something we take for granted. It's something we don't really even think about when we buy a package of bullets, or something when we buy a new gun, we buy a hunting license. I don't think we really think about it that much. But after listening to Jeff, and we did pre-record the show with him, so We're going to play it for you. But what's interesting is to think about how few deer there were in the country in 1937 and where they are today. The entire population of the deer in Alabama in 1937 was about 2,000.
If it wasn't for these folks, we wouldn't be hunting whitetail.
Correct. And we wouldn't have this podcast, and there wouldn't be a hunting industry. There wouldn't be hunting shows. There wouldn't be the Duck Dynasty. There wouldn't be Chasing Tail. There wouldn't be anything on TV about hunting deer.
Zero. Nothing.
Zero.
Nada.
Zero. So when you think about this, just give a little thanks to this Restoration Act, because this whole show, the whole purpose of the Big Buck Registry, would not exist today.
It wouldn't be here, folks.
All right, let's call him up. Let's talk to Jeff. Thanks for joining us. I do appreciate you spending some time with us to go over the article that you wrote. And the article that you wrote was How Gun and Ammunition Sales Affect State Game and Fish Agencies.
Yes, sir.
And I'd like to get into that whole article a little deeper and understand what that's all about. It's kind of interesting to know where money comes from for the state fish and game agencies, and going through your article is quite interesting, but I'd like to let you tell the story.
Sure. Well, I manage a 45,000-acre public hunting area in Alabama, and I can remember unloading a shipment of seed that was about $3,000 worth of seed for our fall planting for wildlife. And the truck driver said, "You mean I paid for all this?" And I said, "Well, sir, do you hunt?" He said, "Well, I used to, but I hadn't hunted in years." And I said, "Have you bought any guns or ammunition lately?" He said, "No, not lately." I said, "Well, you didn't pay a dime for this." And he looked at me funny, and I said, general taxpayer dollars are not used to support wildlife conservation in most states, and it's certainly the case in Alabama. And I think there's a big misconception out there about where agencies get their monies, and the Pittman-Robertson Act is it was a historical act that restored wildlife populations, and currently continues to manage them throughout the nation.
Gotcha.
And it was passed in 1937.
Okay. Jeff, you're a biologist, right? Certified wildlife biologist with the Alabama Division of Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
So tell me more about the Act of 1937. Well, why was it put in place?
Well, presidents, legislators, landowners, sportsmen throughout the nation were concerned that their children and grandchildren wasn't going to have wildlife populations to hunt. And that was the primary reason. Sportsmen got behind it and lobbied for it, and it was passed in 1937. And the area that I managed was established in 1938. It was the first wildlife management area in Alabama.
No kidding.
And it was the second place in our state to receive stocking of whitetail deer. Wildlife populations were dwindling throughout the nation, and it's a great success conservation story.
Mm-hmm.
When you think now in Alabama alone that we will harvest, we will kill as many whitetail deer in 1 year than were in the whole nation in 1900. That's a huge success story, that we're able to manage this resource, without abusing it. We're just, keeping it healthy, and it will be there for generations to enjoy for years to come.
There are a couple things you just said there that are kind of interesting. The first is that the area that you manage was established in 1938, which was not long after the act was put in play.
That's right.
And just so our listeners can hear it, is the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act, 1937.
Yes, sir. Correct.
Usually called the Pittman-Robertson Act. That's how you wrote it, or written it, named after Senator Key Pittman of Nevada.
Yes, sir.
And Representative Absalom, is that what it is? Absalom?
That's how I would say it.
Absalom Willis Robertson of Virginia. So basically in 1937, or prior to 1937, in 1935, 36, so there was a crisis of wildlife going on in the United States. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Many species were on the brink of extinction that we continue to enjoy today. The Rocky Mountain mule deer, there's just a number of species that were just almost completely wiped out, because prior to that, we had the sale of hunting license, and that's just a small portion of what's needed to enforce regulations. And there were no biologists practically in the nation then working with state agencies helping to manage populations. And but they were gone. I mean, we had 2,000 deer in 1900 in Alabama, and now we have about 1.7 million.
2,000 deer were left in Alabama in 1937.
Yes, sir. That's
holy
exactly
smokes.
Right.
Dusty, can you imagine that?
Oh, sure wouldn't take long to eliminate the deer population at all.
Wow.
No.
What was going on in 1930 and the 30s that caused all this?
Well, unregulated sport hunting or primarily market hunting. Back then, people lived off what Mother Nature provided for them. And there was no season, no bag limit for the most part in most states. And, you got your food by going and grabbing your gun and going to shooting a squirrel or killing possums at night, raccoons. Even then, there were hardly no beaver in Alabama because beaver was a popular table fare. And, of course, the deer were wiped out primarily for food.
Interesting. So, like when you see a movie from the 40s that depicts life in the 30s and 20s, that was pretty accurate.
Yeah.
You're out on the frontier shooting game to put on your dinner table.
It was.
There was the civilization was still developing at that point.
That's right. That's right. And they just survived off the land. And, where you had good, rich soil, you were able to farm and maybe didn't have to quite hunt as much. But even those guys that had the fertile soil and farmed a lot still needed meat on the table. And, it was a tough life.
Gotcha.
I think I would have actually enjoyed it back then. But anyhow.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely some elements of that day and time that is very appealing to me and to you and to Dusty. That it's like a rawness to survival. It's kind of the things that I think we partake. That's reasons we partake in hunting today is because we like that tradition. We like to feel like
it's often overlooked.
Very much so.
The meat on the table, that was the whole purpose of hunting back in the day.
Right. Now today we have some grocery stores and stuff like that, but now it's almost like a lifestyle choice to go out and hunt and put free range organic meats on your table instead of going to the grocery store and buying stuff that's wrapped in cellophane. That it's just, but back then that was a necessity. That was one of the ways in which you survived as a human.
It was. That's exactly right. And I think there's a big misconception out there that, a lot of wildlife species are made game animals simply to ensure their survival. And that raises a lot of eyebrows, but that's a fact. If it's better managed, better regulated, if it's a game species. It's like our black bear. It's still considered a game animal in Alabama, but there's no open season on it.
Right.
But we're able to use funds to help manage and restore that population.
Gotcha. So the area that you manage, it was 450,000 acres. Did I hear you correctly?
It's 45,000 acres. I manage it with the partnership of the U.S. Forest Service. Yes, sir.
Gotcha. And that area was the second place in Alabama to receive funds. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That was the second place. It was the first management area established, and it was the second place to receive stocking of whitetail deer. See, I mean, there wasn't any deer back then, and so we had our deer. Most of the deer on my area came from Pittsburgh, North Carolina. And, we brought deer in here from other parts to restore their population. And once the populations could support some hunting, and antler season was allowed, a fairly short one, but and some years later, we started allowing some antlerless harvest.
Gotcha.
This is very, very interesting.
So the deer that were stalked came from, did you say Pisgah, North Carolina?
That's right. Yes, sir.
Pisgah?
That's correct.
Interesting. So what was going on in Pisgah, North Carolina that allowed for some deer to be moved? Was there a better management going on there at that time?
I think it was a more remote area, and it was a big national forest land. So they came off of a national forest, and evidently there wasn't as many people as hungry in North Carolina as there were in Alabama. Maybe they were eating all bear up there, letting the deer go. I don't know back then.
Gotcha. Right.
But we talk about deer. I mean, the pronghorn antelope, 70 years ago, there was 12,000. Now we've got 1 million. Wild turkey, 100,000. Now we got over 4.5 million. Rocky Mountain elk, 41,000 in 1907. Now there's close to 1 million. So I mean, there's a number of successful success stories that go along with the Pittman-Robertson Act, and that's all those monies can be used for. And thanks to gun sales that have dramatically increased in the last 6 years or so, and states have received more funding to do wildlife conservation and management. And we in Alabama we operate about 36 state wildlife management areas, over 700,000 acres on the Pittman-Robertson Act annually.
Wow. Yeah, I think we almost take it for granted. Like, there's so many deer that we chase every single season, but we don't realize that there was thing going on back in 1937. Then if that didn't get corrected, we wouldn't be hunting anything right now.
That's exactly right. I mean, there'd still be a few people chasing squirrels and raccoons, but whitetail deer drives our state. Not only direct individuals that hunt, but individuals that come here and stay a week or two and hunt and stay in motels. And there's an awful lot of money that's spent throughout the nation and other states. And about 80% of our hunters will hunt whitetail deer.
Right.
That's what they prefer to hunt.
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, if you think about where the deer have gone from 2,000 deer in Alabama to the numbers that you have, I mean, I think of Alabama today, tons and tons of wildlife.
Yes, sir, you're exactly right. It's a great time to be a hunter in Alabama and really throughout the nation.
Absolutely.
This is just one state we're taking a snapshot look at, but other states are blessed like we are. But we do have a lot of physiographic regions in Alabama, a lot of different habitat types, and it's one of the most diverse states in the nation, and we're very blessed. And honestly, none of this, even with the Pittman-Robertson Act in our state, would have been possible without the support of our private landowners, because they own and control about 94% of the land in Alabama. So, if it wasn't for their interest in this, they'd make the choice that they're going to manage for deer or turkey or other game species, and they're not going to put a trailer park in, or they're not going to put a shopping mall on their property, or do other things because they're interested in the management of these wildlife resources. So we couldn't do it. We own less public land in Alabama than just about any state in the nation, and without their support, without their help, it wouldn't be possible here and in many other states.
It's a very good point. If you think about the amount of industry that is created around deer hunting, because the population of the deer are well supported now. I mean, it's a massive mega million, probably $1 billion industry at this point nationwide. Would you agree?
Let's see, the article that I wrote in research, since the implementation of the act, more than $13 billion have been collected and distributed with matching funds from state agencies. So in Alabama alone, it's about $1.2 billion annually.
Okay, so $1.2 billion come out of this industry. Now, your article described the funds being distributed because of firearm and ammunition sales. Is there more to it? Is it a tax on the ammunition that we're talking about and the firearms?
It is. It's an 11% tax. The tax in 1937 already existed, but they started earmarking that money to the state wildlife and fish agencies for specific purposes of acquiring land, managing and restoring wildlife populations.
Gotcha. So at the time, back up just to a sec. When we talk about the Restoration Act, there was an act to restore wildlife in the United States, but did it have a weakness in funding at that point, and they needed something to tax so that they could fund it?
They basically just needed the money earmarked. The tax again was already there. Okay. All state agencies had at the time was funds on hunting license sales.
Gotcha.
And that was just, back then that wasn't very much at all. I mean, in Alabama in 1937, most conservation officers, again, there were no biologists, and most conservation officers were required to use their own vehicle. They bought their own little sidearm, and they didn't have any radios. It was just an unorganized, very dangerous field to be in.
Right.
And,
I would imagine, imagine what it was like being a conservation officer back in 1937 when this thing first went into play.
It'd be tough.
You're changing lifestyles.
That would be tough.
Those were some very hardy, very tough individuals, and I would imagine that most of the best officers back then were probably at one time some of the very best outlaws, and at least I've heard stories to that effect. But what's neat about the Pittman-Robertson Act is, we talked about management areas and we talked about restoring populations, but it's also built public shooting ranges throughout the nation. Mm-hmm. It's created access for hunting, fishing, and boating. And it's provided funds for wildlife research. So, there's specific things that money has to be used for and can't be used for anything else.
Mm-hmm. So it really went from being a tax on hunting licenses to a tax on a much bigger part of the hunting industry, being ammunition and firearms. And it's an 11% tax.
11%. and it's matched on a 3-to-1 basis. And what's really important is the states use the hunting license sales dollars for that 25% match to get the 75% match initially. So you have to have the match. You have to match at 25%. And states were broke, so many of them increased hunting license sales to get that money to match to get their $3 for every dollar.
Now, when you say match, what are we matching? Where's the money coming from?
Department of Interior collects the monies.
Okay.
On from the Pittman-Robertson Act.
Okay, got it.
And they will pool, anywhere from $350 to $360 or $70 million annually, and they will look at the formula, and it's based on the number of licensed hunters each state has, and also on the total forested area of the state. So they look at Alabama and they say, okay, they've got 260,000 hunters. They've got 20.1 million acres. This is the formula. Boom. This is what Alabama gets this year. And that's how it's divided up between the states.
That's fascinating. So
it is. And it works so well and continues to work so well that they modeled the Dingell-Johnson Act, which does the very same thing with fisheries. Okay. That's how fisheries departments, state departments are funded, because they placed an excise tax in the early 50s on fishing equipment, and that finally gave states some monies to start managing their fisheries resource. So it's a user pay concept, right. And it's good to see the individuals that are really interested and dedicated to something, paying for it and seeking and receiving the rewards from it.
Absolutely. So I'm in New Hampshire. Dusty is in Ohio. Every year I go online and I order my hunting license and fishing license from the New Hampshire State Fish and Game Department. And I also get my extra deer tag. I get my bear tag. I get my waterfowl and my hit permit. And it costs about $147-ish, thereabouts.
Yes, sir.
Every year. Dusty, what do you pay for your license?
It's $20 for the actual resident hunting license, and then $24 for either sex deer permit. That gets you started. And then you got fishing license and waterfowl tags and federal stamp, and it can get the $100 bill no problem.
Okay, so we're north of $100 easy. On my ticket, though, I never see a tax when they do that. Is that just part of the game, or is it just something I'm not looking at?
Yeah, most state agencies don't actually tax themselves or don't pay any kind of sales tax on anything. If it's a state agency, okay. Whether we're buying tires or we're going to Lowe's to get some wood to build a wood duck house, we don't pay any tax on it.
Right. Like on my license, I don't see a line item that says federal tax for the Pittman-Robertson Act. Boom, here's your tax you got to pay to get your hunting license. There's nothing there. So the taxes aren't, there's a certain amount of money that comes from the hunter's licenses still, correct?
Not from the license. That tax is on firearms and ammunition, sporting arms and ammunition. It's not on the actual license itself.
Did they abandon the license altogether? Any of the money that come from the license altogether? Like where they were originally doing it in the 30s?
The Pittman-Robertson Act cannot be used for any law enforcement activity.
Okay.
So the hunting license sales is what funds the conservation officers.
Got it. Okay.
And what funds the wildlife section and the wildlife management department is the Pittman-Robertson Act.
Gotcha.
And we have to do a weekly report every week of our activities, and we have about 9 codes that we have to code our daily activities out on, depending on what we're doing. I'm also a conservation officer in Alabama. I'm a certified wildlife biologist, and depending on what your activities are for the day, you have to code it so that the accountant knows how to distribute the funds.
So when you say you code it, this is on the wildlife biology side or on the conservation side, conservation officer side?
On our biologist weekly report that we do, okay. we have to code daily activities based on whether we work on management areas or we work for private landowners, or we work in the county enforcing game and fish laws and other activities. There's a number of them, whether we're doing hunter education. You're dealing with government, so you're dealing with a stack of paperwork. And,
right.
That's just all part of it.
Yeah. If it's government, there's got to be a bundle of paperwork that goes along with all this stuff, especially if you're receiving funds from the Department of the Interior.
That's exactly right.
Gotcha. Jeff, what inspired you to write the article?
It gets back to that truck driver bringing me my seed, and that's been a few years ago, and I haven't thought about that. or haven't forgotten about it. And I think there's just and running into hunters and individuals in the field that just simply don't know how we're funded. I've taught tens of thousands of hunter education students, and in my PowerPoint presentation, I always make sure they understand that those that hunt, those that fish, those that buy a license, and guns and ammunition directly pay our salary, period. And don't be afraid to come and talk to us. We work for you. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have a job. And I'm very customer oriented, as with many of our employees. And we have to be that way and need to be that way even more because, if somebody's paying your paycheck, you want to serve them as much as you can.
Right. So in order to get the money to Alabama, you need a certain amount of forests, you need a certain amount of licenses sold for hunting and fishing, and then they'll send the money to match the
That's
money.
Right.
Gotcha. And if you don't get that money, your department suffers.
Yes. Things would be a lot different. That's for sure. We wouldn't be able to manage the wildlife for the public.
Right. I'm going to jump in here, Jay. I got a quick question. From 1937 to now, has the taxes changed any? Has there been an increase in the tax that comes out?
That act has not changed, thank God, a bit. It's 11% still to this day.
Still today, it's 11%. Yeah, that was just a question I had to see if it increased at all or if it's pretty much been level the whole way through.
That's amazing to think that a tax hasn't changed since 1937.
Yep. To my knowledge, that tax has not changed.
Right.
And many, there have been some efforts in the past to tap in some of that money and use it for other things, like some legislators and others. But conservation groups have stepped up and thankfully have put a stop to that in the past, and hopefully will continue to do so.
Yeah, that's great. Just a question there. That's very interesting that it hasn't been taxed. As Jay said, it's with taxes rising regularly like they do with any other thing that's taxed. That it's leveled out at 11% all this time.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely
That's
amazing.
exactly right.
So do you see this changing in the future, Jeff? Do you see this kind of maintaining where it is, and are guns and ammunition sales stabilized enough or increased for whatever reason, whether it be political or whatever? Do you think that there's enough gun and ammunition sales to support where we need to go with fish and game management and resources?
Well, there's an awful lot of other things that we could be doing if we had more monies. I mean, we're thankful for what we got and what we get annually, but there's a number of things that we could be doing a little different and spending more time on and working with other species. But I think that some states have packed other items as well, such as binoculars and kind of non-consumptive use items like camping equipment and to help fund their wildlife department, but currently we're not doing that.
Gotcha.
But I think it's with the shows, honestly, like Duck Dynasty, and you see Doomsday Preppers, and people are trying to get back to the earth. I mean, they're these things they're thinking, this could actually happen. And what would we do? Well, we have trapping workshops now where people are learning how to trap. And there's a whole generation that hasn't even hunted. And I had a guy just the other day he was 40 years old and had 2 kids in his truck, and I ran into him on my area, and he said, "Man," he said, "I don't even know how to skin a deer." He said, "But I'm trying to get back into hunting." All these kind of popular shows have got people thinking, and I said, "Well, I tell you what, I got to hunt this weekend. If you kill a deer, bring it to me at the check station, and I'll skin it for you and show you how to do it."
Right.
And believe it or not, he cooked me up on it. He pulled up there with a grin on his face, and
That's a great story.
It is. That's a true story, and I've scanned it out for him, and he was tickled to death, and he learned how to do it on his own, and he couldn't thank me enough. But like I told you guys, we work for you. Any way we can help you, we need to be doing that.
Right.
That's Alabama's firearms and ammunition tax at work there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's pretty cool because, our show wouldn't exist if the act hadn't been put in play, I would imagine. Right, Dusty?
Yeah, I'm thinking that it saved the whitetails, for one. Yeah, keep them from getting knocked out totally.
We wouldn't
we wouldn't be having this conversation right now if that were existing. You wouldn't have hunting today in a manner in which you would think it would be.
I think we'd still be, we'd probably be talking squirrel hunting. I don't think you can kill all the squirrels out there.
It wouldn't be, you'd be killing something else, but we wouldn't have a big buck registry, big buck podcast at all. Duck Dynasty wouldn't exist. So it's kind of feeding itself, but still, I mean, what we're doing here today is to capture the story, sport, and spirit of big buck deer hunting. And
we got to know how it got to that point.
Right. So we got to know where we came from, but we also need to know where we want to go. And that's what we're doing right now is we know that as long as we keep telling the stories, capturing the photos, and encouraging the sport to live on, then there will be more deer because the money and the taxes will flow back, as long as this act stays in place, back to the wildlife conservation areas, to COs and wildlife biology, to make sure that those populations are around forever for our generations to come. And that money just keeps cycling over and over and over. The stories get created, the energy gets created, the hunters go out in the field and they buy more bullets, they buy more guns, and on and on and on.
That's exactly right, and we appreciate you guys bringing light to this important subject.
And without the biologist, as of yourself, that without you, none of this is available. You do your research and help the area, help conserve the area that this wildlife's got to live in. That they've got to have a home, and somebody's got to make sure that it's correct for them.
That's exactly right, and and I love to share it, with the family and friends. And just last week, my daughter shot a deer, and that's some of the most, fond memories that I have is hunting with my son and my daughter and other family members, as well as you guys will understand that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the kind of story we love to hear, and we like to break it down into the little details about how you even got into the field with your daughter in the first place, all the way through the hunt, and along with the great feelings and emotions that go along with that. That's what we're trying to capture here, so that others can relate to the story and that understand there's a lot of people doing this, and that it's okay to feel good about this. This is a good thing. It's despite some of the anti-hunters out there, this is a good thing.
Oh, it is absolutely, and it's great table fare too.
It's delicious.
It is.
Would you say that hunters are the biggest conservationists out there?
Bar none. Especially wildlife conservation. If it wasn't for them, again, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now.
Right.
Because they pay for it. They support management and conservation efforts throughout the nation. They are the leading conservationists in the nation.
And do you think that the hunters realize that when they buy their tags, when they buy some bullets, when they buy a new gun? Do you think they realize that they're doing an act of conservation when they do that?
I think probably the majority of them do not, unfortunately, realize that. And that's pretty sad.
That's the word we need to get out, that they need to know that by buying and purchasing, they're helping out.
That's exactly right. And thanks to your show and this article and other ways, hopefully more people will come to the realization of that.
Right. Well, we're going to do the best we can to spread this word and keep it going. And I'll keep my eye out for any of the articles you write, Jeff. And we'd love to have you back on the show sometime.
Well, I'd love to come back. Again, thank you for all you're doing for wildlife conservation efforts.
We're happy to participate. And if you could, at some point, maybe come back on the show and share some hunting experiences, we'd love to hear some of those too.
Sounds great, sir. Thank you.
All right, Jeff. I appreciate it. Take care.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You just heard our original 2013 conversation with Jeff Makemson, a certified wildlife biologist who lives inside this system every day. And if there's one thing that interview makes clear, it's that wildlife conservation isn't some vague idea floating in the background. It's a working machine. It has budgets, it has payrolls, it has habitat projects, it has land management plans, and it needs fuel to keep running. That fuel comes from a model most hunters never think about.
The Pittman-Robertson Act created a dedicated funding stream that has rebuilt wildlife populations across America. It has restored deer from near collapse to thriving herds. It has funded habitat improvements that make forests, fields, and wetlands healthier. It has created public hunting access. It has supported research, education, and long-term management. And it has done all of this largely through money generated by hunters and shooters themselves.
That's the part I want you to remember. When you buy ammo, a rifle, a bow, or other hunting gear, you're not just preparing for your next season. You're paying into a conservation system that keeps wildlife on the landscape. When you buy a hunting license, you're helping your state match those federal funds and multiply conservation impact. When you mentor a new hunter, you're helping keep the participation that fuels the system alive. Hunters are not just users of the resource. We are investors in it. And the comeback of the whitetail deer is one of the clearest examples of that investment paying off. So the next time you sit in a tree stand on a crisp fall morning, remember that moment didn't happen by accident. It came from decades of restoration, management, and planning, backed by a funding model that started in 1937 and is still running today. That's the story of the Pittman-Robertson Act, and that's the hidden engine behind modern deer hunting. And if you're enjoying the Evergreen series, do us a favor. Text it to a hunting buddy, post it on your story, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It helps more hunters find the show.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
I'm Jim Keller.
And I'm J. Scott Ammon. And thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunt podcast. We can be found on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you would like to support us and our cause, please consider buying some merchandise off of our merch page by visiting www.bigbuckmerch.com. Catch you next time, and good luck in the deer woods.
As we move on with hearts so strong, echoes of nature sing our song. In every rustle, a story's told of days gone by and hunts of old. Listening close to Deer Hunt by the Big Buck Registry, sharing tips and tales, it's where we ought to be.